So, the lecture I'm going to give today, I call it a heretic outlook on religion, or opium for debaters. And this is an attempt to see religion as more of a social institution, and it is based on the things that I've learned in university over the years and certain conclusions that I've reached. Now, it's important to stress that those are my personal conclusions, and although it is based on facts, and I will try to prove as much as possible, do note that this is an opinion out of many, and you can take it or leave it, but I think that this is something that could be useful in debates. Also, a word of apology if there are people who are religious or spiritual. I do not mean to offend, but I do have a more secular look on religion, so no offense if there is any. Now, let's start with defining what religion is for the purpose of our lecture. And I think that the first thing we ought to do is talk about what we don't mean when we talk about religion. So we're not going to talk about spirituality, we're not going to talk about belief, and we're not going to talk about the existence of God. We are going to talk about religion as I define it as a collective system that is shared by people, and it is something that defines life in the categories of holy versus unholy. It has to do with explaining the world through the unnatural, meaning that it is necessarily in the metaphysical realm in terms of the rhetoric that this religion uses, but it is something that is very much social to the extent that a religion cannot exist only combining with one person. You necessarily need to have a group that shares those beliefs and is willing to go along with the religious beliefs and rules. Now, another thing that religion does, except for defining the world, it actually sets the way people go on to lead their life. And it does so by giving a world view on things that is both moral, meaning how people should act, what is the meaning of life, and so on, but is also very practical, meaning that religion tries to organize the life of the individual on a daily basis. It sets the routine, it sets holidays, it sets certain stages of life, like giving birth, like getting married, like dying, and so on. And a very important thing about religion is that not only does it do all of those things, but religions necessarily say that they are exclusive, meaning that if you belong to a religion and if you believe in the certain things that a religion gives you, you cannot belong to a different religion and have the look of the world in which they offer. If they do not say that they are exclusive, to the least, they say that they are the ones holding the truth, meaning that there might be other religions existing, but they are not right in what they are saying. And this is something that is very crucial to a religion. And as an institution, many times we see that things are being institutionalized, meaning that you have certain key figures that are supposed to do different roles within the organization of life, meaning that you have institutions, meaning that you have rituals, and so on. And this is something that isn't changed. This is something that isn't questioned. People are simply opt in to those institutions and do not ask whether this is the way it should be. It's just the way it is. Just like you go to school every day and you know that there is the parliament and you know that there are many different institutions that lead the life and the world as you know it. Okay, so a bit of typology of religion, meaning there are different types of religion. Why is this important? Just to know that when you talk about religion, many times you need to make the separation of what kind of religion you are talking about. Here, the main categories are a sect, a congregation, and a church. And this is a spectrum, and they differ in terms of size, they differ in terms of how rigid they are in their structure, their hierarchy, their acceptance of other religions, and so on. Sect is the smallest one. Here you have groups like the Amish or the Baha'is and so on. This is usually a small group of people that sometimes they are underground, they are many times ostracized or have been ostracized, and they tend to be closed groups from other people. Here, if there is a sect, the sect has a couple of options that it can transform into. So it can simply fall apart. There were many cases of sects that existed for several years and then disappeared because they were too small, not too many people who wanted to belong there over the generations, or they had certain problems because of their size. They can remain in their own size, but then preserve their own unique lifestyle, like the Amish, or they can grow and become bigger. And here we have the example of the Mormons that started as a small sect, only a few families, and now they are a congregation. A congregation is the middle way. Usually they know that they cannot be exclusive, so they accept others. Usually they are more democratized, meaning that people have more of a say into how this religion looks. Here you have the Reformists, the Baptists, Lutherans, and so on. And on the other side of the spectrum, you have the church, which is the monotheistic religions as we know them. We're talking here about big, organized religions that are usually very structured. They have a long history, they have a hierarchy. People usually are born into them and are socialized to them as they are children. And those usually get recognition from the state and so on. Okay, so this was the formality of definitions. But here let's talk about my view on what makes religion special, or how we should look at religion. Yes?
So, if I understood this correctly, for example, you define ISIS as a type of religion.
No. ISIS is an organization, a political organization, I would say, that is Sunni. So they are a part of Islam.
Yes, but they also execute people which are not in ISIS, and they exclusively require everyone in ISIS to be only in ISIS, and they cannot believe anything else.
True, but I don't think that this makes them a religion.
Okay, so they are not a religion, to make this clear.
No, they are a religious organization.
Oh, a religious organization, but not a religion of
They rely on the fact that there isn't a strong separation within Islam between church and state, meaning that they believe themselves to be the true fulfillers of Islam as they interpret it in the creation of the caliphate. But I wouldn't say that it's a separate religion. Okay, so the way I see religion is that you cannot separate religion from society. Meaning that if you need to explain religion or people that are religious, I would go to the reduction to society and not psychology. So I wouldn't explain things in the individual psychology of the person. I would explain it as the institution and the group as a whole, and what this group aims to achieve or not. And here I think the similarity or the point of reference that you can use is that many times religion would be like culture, like community, like nationality, meaning that you can simply replace the rhetorics or the types of explanation that people use, but still look at it as a group that is united around an idea and tries to execute it in the real world. And when I say that it's like a nationality, it means that there's a two-way connection between them. It means that when you look at religion, I wouldn't in a debate go to the assertions of saying, oh, but it's very different because it's a religion. People would act completely different if we try to enforce a law on them or something like that. I would look at it just like I would at any other group of people that is united around an idea, and wouldn't necessarily say that it's that different. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, I think that many times when we look at things like a nation, we can try to compare it to religion and see that there are many things that those have in common. Here there's the term of civic religion. Because come to think about it, when we think about the state, it is something that resembles religion a lot. We have this abstract notion of a state which no one sees. It's omnipresent, it's out there, it dictates our life, and we have to follow its rules. It tells us what we should do. We never selected it, but it teaches us, since we are children, to obey to it and to be a part of the institutions of the state, and it invokes strong beliefs and convictions in people that people are even willing to die for their own flag. Meaning that many times we can look at this kind of rhetoric and thought not only when applying it to religion, but also to other groups to which individuals can belong. And I think that this can also be a very interesting analysis to make in the debate of how people act when they are a part of the group. Another analogy that I would suggest that you use, because I think it can be very useful, is to see religion as an organization or corporation even that provides a certain service to people. They provide a mediation to God, and they promise to give you the product which is salvation, all in all, or a meaningful life. And I think that this can be for the following reasons. There are 5 reasons for it. So, first of all, if we look at religion as an organization or corporation, the first goal that it sets to itself is preservation, meaning that they want to survive as an organization. They don't want to lose out, they don't want to go bankrupt, they want to continue on existing, to have their own people remaining in power, their own institution being strong, and so on, and they are willing to do many things for it. Secondly, we need to look at it as an institution, meaning that there are certain functions that it does, there are certain institutions, and there are people in it. And the people aspect is very crucial, because just like you have a CEO and you have the other employees down the chain, the same thing applies to a church. And this is very important because many times you wouldn't like to talk about the religion, but you would like to analyze specifically in the debate, how would this affect the Pope? How would this affect the cardinals? How would this affect the believers? And there are many nuances to be made there when referring to the different people within the religion and the interest that they might have because of the specific role that they do in this organization. Thirdly, there is the idea of image. Now, many times we know that in corporations as a brand, so the same thing applies to a religion. A religion has a certain image that people have about it, and this is very important if it wants to sell its product. If it is seen in a positive way, then more people would like to be a part of that religion. If it is involved with certain scandals, people want to get out of the religion because it doesn't seem that appealing to them. So we can see that many times religions try to fight over their image. We can see it in the Catholic religion that had a lot of scandals regarding pedophilia accusations. They were seen as more conservative and less up-to-date with their believers, and now we see the new Pope trying to bring new changes to the religion and try to make a better image of what it means to be a Catholic. So we see that this is something that very much determines how religions act. Fourthly, we say that just like any other organizations, there are different market strategies. So if we want to sell a product, there are different ways of achieving that. And there isn't necessarily a right way to go to it. Meaning that you can try to make your product sell to more people, you can try to make it more exclusive, you can sell it by different means, and there isn't necessarily a right way, and you can make a mistake. And religions do pay a price when they make those mistakes. So for an example, we can see that the rebellion of the Jewish population in Israel against the Romans when they conquered them was something that almost brought about to the extinction of the Jewish people. Now, this was heavily led by the religious institution. And here there was even an attempt to create a Messiah out of Bar Kokhba. Eventually, this backfired and it turned out to be a huge mistake. But this was an example of a religion that tried to be politically active and failed. So we can see that they can do things that are good for them and are bad for them. It's very important to see a religion as an organization because it means that it constantly changes. We cannot speak of a religion that is the same all the time. There have been many changes to the way a religion looks like, the main things that are bothering it, the way it adapts to time, and so on. So it's very important not to say that, oh, it's a religion, it will never change because it's conservative, but try and think whether this is something that can actually be changed or cannot be changed, whether this is something that has precedents too in the past, whether this is something that has been done in other religions, and so on. But do keep in mind that there is no static religion when you analyze that. Okay, so now we move on to the next topic of changes in religion, if we talk about change. And here we can start with, when do religions change? Or when can we say that there is an ability to create a successful change? So, as a general rule, I would say that changes to religion need to happen from within that religion, meaning that it needs to have a support of the people that are usually at the top of the hierarchy of that religion, or at least to have enough of a support of an opposition group that is willing to take their place and is willing to be the new leadership of that religion. Now here, this does not mean that they cannot be influenced by what the people in that religion want or by things that are happening in the outside world, but it does mean that you need to have their support and you need to have them on board if you want to create a certain change to the religion. Now, there are two basic conditions to change. And here I think it applies to every kind of change, but specifically in religion, I think that this is something that you can use. It needs to answer to a need, meaning that if we don't do this, something bad will happen, or it needs to serve a certain interest of the people of that religion, meaning if we do that, we have a lot to gain that outweighs potential harms that might be from the change. Here, an example can be a competition with other religions that might be an interest to try and override them. This can be an existential threat, meaning that if we don't do something, we might be eliminated or we might run out of resources. This can be a battle about the leadership of the religion, and etc. Do notice, though, that when we talk about those kind of changes that come from within, those changes tend to take quite a while. Why? Because generally people don't like changes, so it needs to be done only in specific cases, but usually it also takes time to get people accustomed to the change, to make sure that you get as many people on board with the change, and so on. So we do not see many cases of overnight changes, although this can be done. These are only the minority of the cases. When do those changes succeed? So, as I said, you need to have a good reason for the change. But a good reason for a change is never enough to do that. You also need to have the leaders that want the change, but also have the legitimacy from their people to create this kind of change. Thirdly, you need to have the ability to enforce the change, meaning that only declaring that we want a change is not enough. You usually need to have some sort of institutions to enforce the change and even sanction people that do not abide to the change, to have some sort of retribution for that. Fourthly, you need to have a means of justifying the change. And here, a unique tactic that religions often use to sell to their believers the change is using canonical texts. It's a very effective way to take a text that already exists and that people already believe in it and try to interpret it in a way that serves your goal of change. because then you can say that it is not something that you as a person want, but this is actually a godly directive. And this is something that is inherent to the laws of the religion itself, meaning that people are more willing to accept this kind of change because it is not seen as belonging to the realm of the daily life. Yes.
So, in a sense, that's what people like the Rambam did.
Yes.
Okay.
I think that generally in Judaism you can say that there is the concept of, I'm not sure how it's called in English, but dor holech v'pochet, a generation that loses its power to interpret, and it's a very strong way of saying that people don't have enough knowledge in order to create changes or know what the will of God is. Therefore, we always need to go back to the text and to go back to what God wants. And this was a way of actually creating even revolutionary halakha ruling by saying that it's actually written in the text. So Ovadia Yosef did that quite a lot when he said that Israel can, in the negotiation process, relinquish some of its territory and give it away because it is okay with God, or with allowing the wives of missing soldiers to get a divorce, although their bodies were not necessarily found, something that was very revolutionary, but he constantly said that he did not come up with it himself, but found it in the text. And this is something that many people believe is true. And the fifth condition for success is basically not going to the conditions of failure. So when do those kind of changes fail? So here, if you simply try to force with strength the change from the outside, usually this doesn't help. If you don't have any support from within, a strong example for that is the persecution of Christianity at its early days. The Roman Emperor Neron even went a very lengthy way into giving horrendous death sentences to people that were found to be Christians, and yet this did not make people disavow their beliefs in Jesus. On the contrary, they saw themselves as martyrs, they saw themselves as protecting something that is even more sacred because they are being persecuted. So simply trying to override religion from the outside doesn't work. Also, a change will not work if it is seen as too extreme. And what do I mean by extreme? I mean that it goes against the doctrine, meaning that there is no way to justify this change if you look at the text and if you look at the way the whole religion works. So if it's something that is contradicting the core beliefs of the religion, it is not a change that is likely to succeed. Secondly, if this doesn't serve the people from within. And thirdly, if the change makes the religion too democratic, meaning that the religion would have to give up on its internal structure or its hierarchical structure. And here the most famous example is Martin Luther, who said that people can be saved only due to the power of their own belief and conviction, making the Pope something irrelevant and unnecessary. Now, this could have been seen as something that could go with the Catholic religion. But what happened is that once he said that, many people who were simple believers began to think that they have the right to interpret the text themselves. If I can be saved only due to what I believe, I can also dictate the rules of the religion. So we saw that many times in even farmers' uprising in Germany, they tried to say that they are legitimate to do so because when they read the Bible, God said that they shouldn't be slaves. And here Luther himself was even alarmed by that because he didn't want to break society and he didn't want to break structures necessarily, but he saw more and more people taking religion into their own hands and trying to interpret it the way they wanted. So I would call that a change that is a failure, to make an effective change to the religion while keeping it the religion it is.
Which is not what he did in the end, right?
Yeah, so here I would say that, and this leads me to my next point, that when this kind of change is too extreme, it can lead to a religion falling apart, which I would deem as a failure, because now you simply have a new group, a new religion that believes in something else instead of creating a change from within. So this is the case if the change comes from people within the religion. Usually you have a separation, a creation of a new sect, a new religion, and so on. If the change is from the outside, the likely scenario is to have a backlash and simply have people continue on doing whatever it is that they did, disregarding the outside change. Okay, so here we won't talk about the creation of new religions, but if we want, we can do that later on. Now, a third way, which here you can see it in 4.4 way, I call it a middle path between success to failure, is an attempt to influence religion from the outside. Now, here I think that there is an ability to influence their behavior and thought, but this can be either successful or this could have surprising outcomes. So here I would give the story of Julianus the heretic. He was a Roman emperor, and he rose to power not long after Christianity became an allowed religion, but he hated Christians and he wanted to abolish them. But he knew from the story of Nero that he won't be successful in simply banning the religion. So he decided to go on a more clever way. And what he did is that he said that Christian teachers cannot teach in ordinary Roman schools because it would be hypocritical of them to teach pagan literature while they themselves do not believe in the gods. Now, by doing that, he thought that everyone would stick to a pagan education and that the Christianity will not spread. What he didn't predict is that all of those teachers that were now sacked from the ordinary educational system simply created their own Christian schools. And those schools became more popular than the pagan schools and eventually outnumbered them, causing the loss of many pagan literature because it was not a part of the curriculum, because now there was a contradiction between Christianity and paganism. So while Julianus did make a change, he didn't make the change he wanted to do in the end. So I think we need to carefully analyze what are the likely scenarios of change that might be. But let me give some examples of influences that were good or that affected religions. So we can do that by using a religious symbol in order to try and influence it. Here we have an example of Turkey. When Ataturk, the founder of the modern Turkey, tried to make the country secular, he decided that he should go against every form of Islam that he knows. And one of them was the veil or the burqa. But he knew that simply banning it is not going to help. So what he did, he issued a law that said that all prostitutes needed to wear a burqa, meaning that people didn't really want to wear a burqa anymore since it was associated mainly with prostitutes. So this was a very clever means of making sure that people don't do a religious act. Another means of influencing is by giving an economical incentive. And here we have the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire didn't ban any other religions. It actually treated them pretty nicely, but they usually had to pay a bit more taxes. And there was a preference to everyone who was Muslim within the empire, meaning that they got more access to political power, meaning that they got prioritized in many different institutions. So many people did convert to Islam during that time if they wanted to lead a more comfortable life. So it didn't eliminate other religions, but it did make Islam stronger within the realm of the empire. A third way of influencing is by using brute force. Now here, as we said, this can never account to a full change to a religion. This usually has a limited impact, and also it is not very popular in Western liberal democracies, right? We cannot that tries to forcibly do something to a religion. But we can still see phenomena happening today, like in China, that forbids certain religions or religious acts by people. Now, I think that this is limited because I think that once people will be given a chance to go against this, they would go back to their religion, they would do things underground and so on. And a very good example for that is in the former USSR. In the former USSR and in other communist countries, there was a ban on being religious. You had to be an atheist, and many people didn't even go to churches because they knew that their priest might even rat out on them to the authorities, and they could be sanctioned. But once the Iron Curtain fell, people came back to religion with a bang. We now have many people that are religious, even in countries that weren't religious before. So in Hungary, you see many people rediscovering their religious roots. So you even have many people finding out that they are actually Jewish and becoming really Orthodox Jewish. So I think that you can only force people to a certain extent, and once you are not strong enough, you won't be able to do that. Okay. So, do we have time, Itai, for more examples for successes and failures? Okay. So, more examples of success of changes. I think a very interesting example is polygamy with the Mormons. In case you don't know, the Mormons were an American sect of Christianity. It was founded by Joseph Smith that said that he discovered a holy book written in Egyptian that tells the story of a prophecy that makes him the religious leader of the sect, and so on. And they used to have polygamy. Now, the US government tried to go after that and tried to sanction them and tried to fine them and so on, but it was pretty unsuccessful. And then they decided, after quite a lot of time of trying, that the thing they're going to do is they're simply going to confiscate all of the assets of the Mormon church until they decide that polygamy is banned. Now, since this was such an existential threat to them, and since they were on the brink of losing everything because the government simply seized all of their money, the next day, Joseph Smith had a dream in which God told him that polygamy is heretical and should be banned, and it is actually his will that only one man marries one woman. So this was a very effective way of creating the change in the religion.
So it was a little extreme. Because they did seize a lot of money for, real.
Yes.
Yeah.
They were on the point of simply choosing to ban polygamy or vanish. So they had to do it. It was a dire need.
Yeah, but as I'm saying, the change was initiated by America, right? The US government.
True, using the incentives.
Using very extreme incentives.
Yeah, but I think that they were lucky in the sense that this was not doctrinal. So this wasn't written anywhere. This was simply a part of the lifestyle that Joseph Smith also enjoyed being a part of.
Very much so.
Yeah. So he could alter it by saying that God changed his will. Another case of a change within religion is the Second Vatican, now let's call it, not sure what's the name, I think the Second Vatican Committee in 1962. This was a committee that decided that the Latin language will not be the primary language of prayer in the Catholic Church. Now, this was a huge change because up until that point, people could not use their own native language in prayer and in Mass, meaning that many people didn't understand what they're praying for. And this became more and more of a problem because the heads of the church felt like the believers could not connect to what they're praying for, and even the priests didn't know Latin enough, which became quite embarrassing when there were mistakes done by their own people. So it was then that they decided to make the change, and this was a change that came from within by the Pope and the cardinals because they saw these kind of trends. Another interesting thing, and this is a prediction for the future, but I think it's grounded enough in reason, to say that it is probable that the Catholic Church in the future would allow priests to get married. And why do I say that? So, first of all, the current Pope already stated that the celibacy of priests is something that is a problem. And it's something that might cause people not to go into becoming priests. But also due to the fact that this is not something that lies in the religion itself. This is an historical concept of priests cannot get married that started in the 11th century, due mostly to inheritance. The church was afraid that if priests marry, they simply give their job to their children after them, or they would give some of the money coming from donations or the assets of the church to their children, thinking that it belongs to them. So they decided to ban it. But there is nothing religious about the banning of priest marriages. Also, there are priests that are already married, meaning that there is a precedent. Now here mostly we are talking about people that were other Christians that converted to being Catholic and are now recognized as priests, and certain parts of the East that are Catholics but are also married. So there are those people already. And fourthly, because marriage is a holy sacrament, meaning that God not only allows marriage but encourages people to get married. So you can justify it by saying that if marriage is such an important thing, it's important enough for priests to do it as well. So that's why I think that it's more likely for this kind of change also to happen from within. Now let's give certain examples of failure. So here we gave already the example of Nero and the Roman Empire going against the Christians. Another interesting example is the example of FGM. Do you know what this is? Female genital mutilation. This is certain medical procedure that is done on women in order to prevent them from enjoying sex, and by that trying to conform them into a life of marriage and not cheating on their husband. And this is something that is considered very cruel. And when the British mandated Africa, they tried to ban this in Eritrea and in Sudan. And when they did that, they not only caused this to stop, but the form of FGM even became worse. So it became more horrendous in terms of the damages that were created, because the locals, in order to defy the colonialist power, made it more cruel in order to show that they will not succumb to this kind of dictation from the outside, which is very unfortunate. But I think that on the other, more optimistic side, we can see the example of the Bedouins in Israel that have over the years decreased this practice amongst themselves, and this is without having a law in Israel that bans such a thing from happening. This is done simply because they see more of their neighbors and the other communities living in Israel, and there is more awareness to the fact that this is something wrong, this is something that shouldn't necessarily be done, and we see that it is becoming less and less popular, even without the government going against it. So maybe it is worth considering that while we might have certain victims right now, we would rather go for the more long process in order to create a change.
This is connected to the image that you talked about, that religious people want to save a good image on them.
Yeah, I agree. I think that many times you try and imitate something that is considered good. The same thing happened with polygamy in Judaism in Europe in the Middle Ages, when the Jewish communities actually took something that was very Christian of being in a monogamous relationship and implemented it because they saw that this is something good, and also because they had other reasons that mostly had to do with the structure of the family and parents being afraid that their daughters would not be provided for economically. So they had an incentive to change that. But yes, image does play a very large role into that, and if you can see someone else who is doing something successfully, you might want to simply hop on that wagon as well. Okay, another example that didn't work is obviously the Orthodox religious Jews in Israel and the attempt to enlist them to the army, which didn't work. And another, can we give two more examples? Okay, so an interesting example that not many people know is that there was a Pope in 1978 that was in office for only 33 days until he found his death in weird circumstances, we can say. And the Vatican still doesn't give the full information on how he died, who found him, where was the body, what was he holding. And there are many reasons to believe that this death is actually him being poisoned by people that didn't want him there. And I had a professor that said that he very much resembles the current Pope, and that even this Pope might find himself in the same situation or even dead sometime soon. And why is that? Because let's look at the thing that this Pope did. His name was John Paul I. So he was considered very populist, meaning that he spoke to people in a language that they understood. He used proverbs, stories, and so on. He was considered someone not coming from the top of the hierarchy, but a people's person. He objected the Italian mafia, which is a big no-no in Italy. He met in the UN in order to try and find a way to regulate childbirth and even using contraception. Once again, a very radical change when it comes to being Catholic. And he tried to go against other people that had an authority. Now here, if you look at the current Pope, he also does things that are quite similar. So Franciscus goes against the mafia. He even stood in the heart of Palermo saying that the mafia is like a cancer in Italy. He says things that might be interpreted as more liberal, even saying that he has no problem with gay people. He is for trying to maybe control childbirth, and he's not very popular with the conservative parts of the Vatican. So I hope nothing happens to him, but if something does, this is the prediction that he might follow the path of John Paul I. And here it's a really good example of someone who was not accepted even within his own establishment, and even though he was elected. And another example of a failure, so if we gave the example of money as an incentive that works, we have the opposite when it comes to Scientology. Scientology is a very controversial religion. There are parts of the world in which it is considered a cult and it is illegal, like in Germany. There are places in which it is simply allowed, but in the US, if you get the recognition of being a religion, then there is a lot to gain from, because you are tax exempt, meaning that you don't have to give anything from the donations that you get. Meaning for Scientologists that they really, really wanted it. But they wouldn't get recognition from the government because they weren't considered a religion and they were considered to do things that are borderline even with certain human rights. So what they decided to do in order to get that recognition is to go on a massive campaign against the IRS in order to recognize them. So they started funding lawsuits against the IRS. They had newspapers and media outlets putting on stories about how evil the IRS are. They sponsored libertarians saying that tax money is theft and so on. And they went against the IRS so strongly that by the end of the 1990s, the heads of the IRS met with the heads of Scientology to sign a contract with them that they would recognize them as a religion if they withdraw all of their lawsuits against them. And they won. Not only did they win, they showcased to their beliefs on a huge screen at a huge party, we won. So here is an example of the religion being stronger than the government and not even letting financial incentives to get in its way, using all of its power to go against the strongest institutions of the state. Okay, so let's talk about different strategies of change. So basically there are 4 strategies in which a religion can change. There is the idea of imitation, trying to take certain elements and simply doing the same. There is adaptation, changing yourself to reality and things that arise. Yes?
Could we maybe turn on the AC?
Yeah.
How do we do this?
It's a part of the You ask God, you pray.
I say we suggest a change to the AC system. It is not too extreme, we only need it to be turned on.
The question is, does it have the interest? Is it?
There we go.
Okay. So the third strategy of change, which I find very interesting, is cooptation. Meaning that you say that you can have both. You simply swallow elements of other religions and say that the believers can choose. Here the interesting example to that is Hinduism in India that simply co-opted principles from Buddhism and said to their believers, you don't have to choose between being a Buddhist and a Hinduist. You can be a Hinduist and do everything that both religions do. And this was so strong that it even brought about to the decline of Buddhism within the subcontinent because people simply became Hinduists. There was no moral issue of their religion anymore. Another example here is the way Christianity adapted itself in Ireland. It simply took pagan rituals and said that they could be a part of Christianity. And even now we can see that there are certain emblems or certain things that were pagan that are now part of Christianity. And I'll take you in a second. And a third example is the Kaaba in Mecca. Do you know that?
Yeah.
So the Kaaba is the holiest site to Islam. It is holy both to Sunnis and Shiites. It is in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca, and it's considered a religious duty to go to Mecca and to be there at least once in a believer's life. So the Kaaba initially was a pagan site. There was pagan ritual there. It's part of the meteor that landed in that place. And because Muhammad saw that this is so popular and he cannot ban that, and also because there is a lot of money to be made from having this site, he decided that this is something that is going to be sacred to Islam as well. So he co-opted it into the religion, saying that it's okay to worship there as well.
And does the Islam count also as well? Because Islam was born when Muhammad made Islam, copied a lot of
Religions, many
many features of other religions, such as
Yeah, so I think Islam is very interesting because Islam, I think, shows all of the strategies in one. So there is imitation of certain concepts. There are even the same figures. So you have the angel Gabriel that is the one that came to Muhammad in the dream, but it's also an angel that is used in Judaism and in Christianity. There is adaptation to the surrounding that he had. There is the co-optation of other religions into Islam. And there is the fourth strategy as well, which is differentiation, meaning making yourself different on purpose. So if we look at Islam, we can see that there was a point in which Muhammad was very disappointed by the fact that there weren't many Jewish people that joined Islam. So while in the beginning he tried to appeal to them and tried to make Islam as close to Judaism as possible, but even the direction of prayer was initially to Jerusalem and not to Mecca. Afterwards, he changed his attitude and started saying bad things about the Jewish people, saying how disloyal they are, changing things to separate himself from Judaism and so on. Now here it's interesting, if you look at the Quran is organized not by the order of the chronological writing of the verses, but in the order of the length of each chapter. So you can see that there are chapters scattered around, some of them liking the Jews, some of them disliking the Jews, and it's really a mishmash, but chronologically there was a change of attitude, but you cannot see everything of itself. Okay, so now we have topic number 5, which I call fighting over religion or over culture. Now here I think that many times when we look at a conflict that many people deem to be a religious conflict, often it is not about religion itself, meaning that it doesn't have a lot to do with theology or what people believe or what God told them, but it has to do with different social categories. And it's very important for us to understand that, because many times in a debate, we can use that in order to say that maybe the way to solve a conflict is not through a religious means or through religious people. Or many times it helps us understand why people actually dislike each other, which doesn't necessarily have to do with the fact that they believe in other gods. Also, I think that this gives us a broader perspective on the notion that people would probably always find a reason to fight with one another. People would always have a will to say that there is an us versus them. And many times religion is simply a convenient category to use the us against them, but there is nothing in the religion that says that there should be conflict. Now, let's give certain examples of conflicts that are deemed religious but are actually not. So, from these days, you have the northern western part of China with the Uyghurs. This is a Muslim community. They are being persecuted against, not because they have a different religion mostly, but because unfortunately they sit in a part of China that is very rich in resources, and the Chinese are afraid of them wanting to become autonomous, independent, and then the Chinese wouldn't have access to those resources, meaning that they have an interest to go against their religion. Same thing in Myanmar with the Rohingyan Muslims. They are considered to be illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. That's why they don't have IDs. That's why they're being persecuted against. Many times when you hear about the refugees on boats coming to Australia, many of them are Rohingyans coming from Myanmar because they are being persecuted by Buddhists. Also, India, Pakistan. This is something that might be seen as Hindus versus Muslims, but this is a conflict that has a lot to do with nationality, because there was a lot of fear within the Muslim community that once India gains its independence and the British will leave, they could not lead the life that they want, and they would be persecuted for being different than the Hinduists in religion. So they wanted to have their own country in order to make sure that they are the sovereign of themselves and that they won't be persecuted. But this isn't necessarily because of what they believe, but because they were simply afraid of the political consequences of being a minority within a new country. Here, the last example that I would give these days is that many times colonial powers had a preference to certain religious minorities within the countries that they ruled. Usually it was because it was a group that they liked to work with, they wanted to make a part of the bureaucracy and so on. Here we have the example of the Maghreb area in Morocco, in which the French preferred the Jewish population, which made them very rich because they had more access to jobs and to education, and they were part of the French bureaucracy. Now, this caused that when the French left Morocco, we saw their phenomena like pogroms that were prior to that only in Europe, not because the Jews had a different religion, because before the French, there was tolerance. They did live together and coexisted. But it was because of those tensions that were created because of the inequality, the economical inequality, the political inequality between the Jewish people and the local people in Morocco, that there was this built-up animosity that eventually led to horrible violence of one group against the other. But this didn't have to do with the religion, and this was something that could have potentially been avoided. So it's very interesting to notice that it's not this Islam versus Judaism type of conflict. Can I give the last example or no? No. Okay. So if you want, then later you can ask me about the Crusades and why I think the Crusades are not about religion, and also why I think that the Sunni-Shia breakup is not about religion but more about politics. Okay.
Which brings us again to the subject of ISIS.
Yeah, but this is something that happened before.
Yeah.
But yes, it has to do with the type of organization within the Caliphate and who gets to be the Caliph. And this was the battle that decided.
Now I know what the difference is between the two, but we could say college.
Okay, so here we move on to the next subject of what can we take from this about the church and state relationship. So it's important to notice that many times throughout history there are examples of cooperation, there are examples of mutual hatred, of battles, and so on. And this is something that can change according to the various interests of both of the bodies, because sometimes they can work together because they need to achieve something, and sometimes it is mutually exclusive, the one success with the others. And examples of cooperation. So in Israel you have the Orthodox Lithuanian current within Judaism that got the support of the Israeli government via subsidies, that created a situation in which they were able not to work. Now, this is something that is very unique to Israel, because if you look at Orthodox Jews living abroad, you see that all of them work because they have no way of sustaining themselves economically. But here in Israel, because there was this kind of cooperation, it allowed certain people within the Orthodox sect to go on and rationalize why it is not preferable by God that people do ordinary daily job and not continue on studying the Torah and so on. But this is something the state of Israel very much caused, and not the religion itself. Another example of cooperation is, of course, the Catholic Pope and fascism. There was a contract between the fascist party and the Pope that the Pope would endorse them and would get certain benefits. And a third example, which I think is probably one of the worst cases of cynically using religion to get political gains, is an example in Haiti in 1959. Once there was a new ruler. His name was Papa Doc. It was after the British left there, and he used the religious beliefs of people in certain voodoo demons to create a secret police that looked exactly those demons. So when people saw the police knocking on their doors, they were literally scared to death because they thought that a demon is coming to get them. Therefore, they cooperated much more with the evil dictatorship of Papa Doc, and this was a genius but evil way to use religion in order to get what he wanted politically from the people that had a belief in this type of food. Okay, so examples of, on the contrary, conflict and animosity. So an interesting example is in the Middle Ages. There was a huge conflict between the popes and different European kings of who gets to be the ultimate ruler, and it was specifically about who gets to appoint people within the church, because it was the case in which rulers were the ones to decide who bishops are going to be, and not people from the church. And the way that one of the popes dealt with it was, I think, Leo the 8th or the 10th, I'm not sure. He decided to excommunicate the emperor and to say that he's not a true Christian. And to say that he's not a true Christian. Now this was something detrimental because at the time the emperor was busy with infighting in Germany. There were many people that wanted to take his leadership from him, and he knew that once he is excommunicated, there would be many people who would not be loyal to him anymore because he's not considered a Christian. So what he did is known as the Walk to Canossa, in which he went to the Pope's castle. He sat in the snow for 3 days, waiting for the Pope to forgive him and to apologize for his sins, and eventually giving way to the Pope and giving him more authorities. So this is an example of an animosity in which the church won because it had a very strong tool. Okay. Let's talk about the models of relationships that we see right now between church and state. And here, once again, there is a spectrum of relationship. There are 4 basic models which we can talk about. On the one end, we have the complete separation of church and state and the misrecognition of the church by the state, meaning that the state does not contribute in any way and does not give any privileges to religion. Here the example is France, that does not recognize any religion, and there is even a clause within the constitution of France that says that once you enter the public sphere, you cannot put on yourself any indication or sign of belonging to a religious group. That's why if you are, let's say, a teacher in school, you cannot wear a cross or you cannot come in a veil, because this goes against the separation of church and state. Second, on the spectrum, you have the separation of church and state, but the recognition of religions. Here we have the example of the United States, meaning that the government itself and the institutions are not affected at all by religion. They do not intervene in religion whatsoever, but they do recognize different religions and they give certain benefits to them. So this can be things like tax exemptions and so on, because they see it as a public good. Thirdly, you have religion of the state, meaning that the state recognizes a certain religion, it identifies itself as belonging to that religion, and it controls certain aspect of that religious and the institutions of that religion. So here the example is Israel, that recognizes Judaism as the official religion of its people, and it also appoints people for certain religious roles. So you have Harav Rashi that are responsible for the interpretation of that religion. Also, this is an indication of a preference of a certain type of religion and the defining of it, meaning that reformists and conservatives are not considered a part of that state religious. And another example here is Egypt, that also has pretty much the same thing with what they call azahar, which is their type of rabbanut, if you want to call it that way. Fourth model on the other end of the spectrum is a theocracy, meaning that it is the religion that controls the state. Here, the example is Iran, meaning that it's the people of that religion that are the ones that set the rules. They say that the state is run by the supreme power of God, and so on. I think that this is something that ISIS is trying to do.
And all the American countries are going under this law, or some countries.
So you can say that they are, in the sense that they do allow certain aspects of their organizations to be religious. So they recognize certain ceremonies. You can get married only through the religious institutions. You have the religious calendar, and so on. But there are, once again, different degrees within that of how religious or secular religious state can be. Yes.
I think Azerbaijan is a very unique state of a majority of Islamic people, but from the other side, a secular state.
Yeah, it does happen. It belongs to, I would say, even the first model. Also, Turkey in the past. Now things are changing in Turkey, and Erdogan is bringing religion back. But prior to him, you could say that there was a complete separation of church and state there. So it is not necessarily the case that all Muslim countries are like that, but I think that most Arab countries are. Okay, so now we have the next topic of religion as culture and the importance of symbols. So here there is, I think, a beautiful definition of religion that was made by the anthropologist Geertz, and I would try to literally translate what he said. So it's an array of symbols that work to produce certain motives or moods that are vocal and long-term, and they are done by raising certain aspects of the universe and dressing them in a halo of facts that convinces people that those moods and motives are real indeed. Now, what does this definition mean? Because it's quite long and complicated. It means that a religion tries to make us feel certain things, tries to motivate us, and tries to make us look at the world a certain way that is not necessarily the way the world is physically. And they do so by convincing us that those moods or motives are real, that they actually have an existence in the world. Meaning that if I grow up in a religion, I explain to myself things that I see in the categories and the stories that the religion tells me. So if I see something that one might call a coincidence, I might say this is a godly miracle, because I was indoctrinated to think that things are being done in religious categories. And why do I think that this is very important to look at religion this way? Because I think that those categories and those symbols that religion uses constantly surround people, and they affect the way people interpret their reality. Now, this impact is even stronger than facts or rationale. That's why I think that many times it's very hard to convince someone who is deeply religious of something by using simply rational arguments, because he believes that what he thinks is real. And he cannot be convinced because he looks at a symbol. He doesn't look at the process of having proof, evidence, and so on. His whole life is evidence to something else, meaning that if you try to convince him, you are not speaking in the same language. And I think that this is very important to analyze how people perceive things and how we can maybe convince them to do one thing or the other. Also, those symbols are many times non-verbal, so it is interesting to see how we use those kind of things and how they influence people. And I would also say that having this kind of mood or emotional impact is something that shouldn't be taken for granted. Meaning that many times we say, oh, people, if you paint a caricature of Muhammad, they will necessarily be violent. But come to think about it, there isn't necessarily a logical link between seeing a caricature and being violent, right? Because someone else might see a caricature and be sad. Someone else might see a caricature and laugh. Meaning that there isn't this automatic connection of people should feel a certain way, but people are being taught through their religion and through their culture to have a certain association of an emotion to a religious thing. And I think that this is very interesting if we try and think of how we can break this kind of cycle. Can we actually teach people to think differently? Can we set an example of having a different emotional impact and so on? And I think that this is an interesting thing also to analyze how many times a group influences the way we feel about something that shouldn't necessarily be automatic.
Maybe is it connected to which type of religion?
I agree. So here I think this is something that is very specific, but I wouldn't necessarily say specific to a religion, but specific to the historical context that is happening. So here an example that I like to give is what we call in Israel Ima Taliban. It's a sect of certain Orthodox women that decided to put more and more layers of clothing on themselves in order to indicate they are modest. Here I would say that they did this because of group pressure. They wanted to show that they are modest, and each one wanted to show that she's more modest than the other, which became sort of a competition of who does more, and it was this kind of group atmosphere that focused to this feature of religion that made them go to extreme depth because of that. Okay.
That's you.
I mean that if you take, for example, Buddhism, if you will show to a Buddhist some sort of a picture that laughs on the religion, the Buddhists wanted be violent because the religion of Buddhism doesn't have doesn't have something violent in it, but in Islam this is the other thing.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say that this is inherent to Islam. I would say that this has to do with certain communities that want to show that they are religious enough, so they take offense in the hurting of their religion, and they try to demonstrate that they are pious by being violent, by saying that this cannot be tolerated by them. And I think more and more people opt into it because more people want to show that they are indeed pious. And I think there were certain analogies that could be made to Christianity back in the day. So let's take the example of the religious wars between Catholics and Protestants that were very much violent, but because of that history they decided that they should resort to means, and there was a whole process of deciding as a culture not to be violent when encountering certain depictions of religion. And I think that in the case of Islam, this is not the cultural surrounding that people have right now, especially when we're talking about communities that are usually ghettoed in Western Europe, that do feel that they are already more vulnerable, that do feel like they are under attack, and do want to show more how religious they are.
And going back to the example earlier with Islam, you could say it's kind of like a slippery slope. So, where you have a religion which people want to show that they are the most religious, they are the greatest believers, and so they act in extreme ways they otherwise would not act. And when someone acts in an extreme way, another person wants to best him because he's the most religious and he wants to show them, which over time leads to more and more extreme organization. Like
Exactly.
for example, how you had Hezbollah and Hamas, and now you have ISIS, which is more extreme than both.
So I think the examples also have to do with a backlash against the Western civilization and
that's
globalization.
the source.
But I agree about the process.
In a sense.
In a debate, I would call it a market failure, in which everyone tries to do what serves him the best, but eventually everyone loses. I think it's a nicer analogy to give.
Well, yes, kind of really is something.
Yeah. So it's a market failure of ideas. Okay, how much more time do we have?
Basically, 20 minutes if
Okay.
you want.
Okay. So let's talk about, is religion good or bad? Because it has to do with many debates that you might encounter. You might need to have points about one way or the other, and I think it's a very good tool to have. I think you should remember the basics and, of course, use them specifically in the debate in the way that you want. So let's start with why religion is bad. So, we can say that this is something that prevents people from thinking rationally. This, many times, religion gives us a solution that might even be seen as too easy. Instead of thinking about things, instead of making your own decisions on yourself, you simply can outsource it to your rabbi, your priest, other people in your religious community, and so on. You don't really have to make the rational calculus of how you lead your life.
Beforehand, you compared religion with the state, so what's the difference in this case?
So I think the difference is that because religion also uses symbols and also uses things that cannot be proven or disproven, like God, it's harder to rationalize and try to prove against. While in the nation, although it's not easy being a dissident, it's not easy going against your state, you are probably more likely to do that because you can argue with the state on the same rational level and the same type of claims. So I would say that it's much harder when it comes to religion. Also, I would say that there are certain religions that have more control over your life, meaning that they demand you to do more things and they limit your freedoms to do certain things, unlike Western liberal democracies that usually allow you to have more autonomy in the sense of choosing your own lifestyle and what you can do. And here I think that it might be more difficult to be in a religion. Now, also this brings me to the point that many times it's much harder to be a nonconformist in religion because many times there are grave sanctions on those who do not conform to what the religion wants you to do. In the easy cases, this can be simply having your family avoid you or burning certain bridges with people. But in harsh cases, this can even be violence against you. And here we are talking about being non-conformist, not only in maybe saying that there is no God, but many times it is your own identity that does not conform with religion. So let's say you belong to the LGBTQ group, then necessarily you cannot have it be accepted by a religion like Christianity or Judaism or so on, meaning that you will be ostracized, which is a problem. Or many times there is oppression against women in religion, making it much worse for people to belong to that group. Also, I would say that many times religious people abuse their power, the fact that they can tell people what to do, they can use it for different political goals, they can use it to target certain people and so on, and this is something that might lead to the exploitation of people, which is very problematic. Also, I think that religions are more rigid in their thinking, meaning that they are less susceptible to moral changes. Now, if we assume that we don't have a monopoly of what is true and what is moral, we would like to have means of evolving morally. And religions are less capable of doing that because they don't like changes as much as other types of organizations. So that's problematic. But now let's rebut what I said to you against religion. So as I already mentioned, I think that people would always look for reasons to go against one another and to have certain conflicts. So I don't think that you can blame religion for making people violent or making people go one against the other. And here I think that this is a very strong rebuttal to give to people, that there isn't necessarily something about that makes people do that. Also, there is the question of how effective is religion these days, because today there are many different religions for people to choose from, and there are many different other institutions that give us cultural values, legal values, and so on. So I'm not sure that people are simply trapped into the religion with no way of looking to the sides and deciding for themselves what they want to take from the religion and what they don't want to take from the religion. So I'm not sure it's as oppressive as one might say. Also, I would be careful with analyzing religion only in a one way, meaning that if in a debate someone assumes that religion is so strong that it would make you do violent things, bad things, oppressive things, they would also necessarily have to accept that religion is as strong into making us do good things, like giving to charity, like being in solidarity with our community, like doing good deeds to others because God told us to. So we need to look and balance between the different things that religions tell us, and we need to see how much of a credit we are willing to give religion as a whole. Also, good things that there are about religion. So, first of all, it creates a certain cohesion. It makes us one group, it makes us feel like we belong, it makes us feel more safe, more secure, it makes us want to help people that we perceive as being in that group with us, and this is generally a good thing because it means that we have more of a community of people and not everyone living as an individual trying to survive on the expense of their neighbors. Then we have the idea that religion does have a social control in order to make people more moral and more social in their behavior. Meaning that people are afraid to do bad things because they think it's a sin. People swear on the Bibles in court because we believe that many times they would not lie when taking the oath. So we do think that this can make us do good things, just like we don't commit crimes because we think that this is something that the state bends us to. Here, this is something even stronger. You think you will go to hell if you do something that is immoral or hurts others. So it can be seen as a good thing. Yes?
You talked about when they take an oath in court. So like in America when they take an oath, so it's Christian, it's like the Christian Bible, or is it like our Bible or Muslim?
It's the Old and the New Testament.
And if it's like Muslim, someone Muslim, so they change the Bible to respect.
I'm not sure. It's an interesting question. I think we should look into that and see whether they distinguish between who is on the stance or not, or they just take it as a symbol of being truthful. It's interesting.
Actually, for Muslims specifically, they do believe swear on the Bible and the New Testament because they recognize those books. But for like Hindu and other religions that don't have any connection to the Bible, I think they do switch the Holy Book. But I'm not sure.
Okay, so we'll check that, but it is very interesting. So thank you. Okay. So another thing that religions do give us, we can say that we got our morality, at least in the West, from religion. So I would say that it's a good thing that we got a moral concept of how we should live, which is a very good thing, or to the least it means that we will not be in a state of chaos, of everyone doing whatever they want, but we have a set of rules that guide us through life. Also, I would say to the idea of groups fighting each other that maybe it is even better to have large religions, because then we have a sort of mutually assured destruction between them. If a religion knows that it cannot go against the other because it won't win, we have more coexistence. And here the example is the Protestants and the Catholics that simply understood that there is no way for them to fight one another, so they just decided to accept the reality as it is, in which there are people who believe that and people who believe that, and that's the world. But there is no way of forcibly converting others. Also, there are good deeds that are part of a religion, so there are pacifist religions, there's charity, there's donations and so on. And many times religion do answer a very strong psychological need that individuals have, which is an explanation of the world, giving certainty in an uncertain world, meaning that it gives you answers for many times that people are in crisis. Also, religions give us a meaning and a purpose in life, meaning that you don't feel like you were just born and you don't know what to do, but you have a sense of a higher destiny, which is something that many people want. And here there's an interesting essay that was written about religion and mental health. So it was found that if people truly believe in the religion and they don't just go to church, it is usually connected with positive impacts on their mental health. But if people just go for the ceremony but don't report believing, usually it is negatively associated with mental health, meaning that they are less mentally healthy than the average. So here it's another interesting distinction and nuance to make. So not all religious people are happier, but those who actually believe are happier. Okay, now here we have, if you look at your pages, we have clause 9 and 10 that are optional. Now I don't know how are we with time, and I don't know if you want them, but if you do and we have time,
You have
we can.
13 more minutes. Stav is asking, how are you?
I'm good, I think. I'm good if you're good.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have time for those? Okay, you know what? I'll ask you guys. What do you want to start with?
I would rather have 9,
9?
Yeah.
Okay.
personally. So I don't know what to call it.
9?
Yeah.
Okay. So, when do people become religious? So here, I think there are certain categories and personal traits that we can look at when it comes to people being religious. So when we compare men and women, we see that women tend to be more religious than men. The reasons for it are probably the fact that women are socialized from a young age more to conform to certain beliefs. They are socialized more to accept things that are in the spiritual realm and not only things that are material and so on. Also, you can say that this has to do with certain disadvantages of women in society. You see that when people suffer more or perceive themselves as suffering more in society, they tend to look for answers in religion because it's a source of comfort for them, because it gives them something that other people or in the outside world they cannot have. So I think that since women historically tended to be more oppressed, they are also more historically belonging to religion. Also, when we look at socioeconomical status, this is not seen to affect the degree of being religious, meaning that there is no connection between how rich you are and how religious you are, but it does have to do with the way you practice being religious. So usually we see different forms of churches that people from different statuses go to. Usually we see that people that are richer tend to be a part of the religious community by giving more money, by showing up at events, and we see people that have less doing other roles within the religion, and so on. The next thing that we can look at is religion and education. Now this is something very interesting because I found a research from 1997 that showed that the relationship between the two is not one-sided. So when people go to college, the college doesn't make them either religious or non-religious. It confirms the belief that they already came with. Meaning that people that came to college when they are secular became more secular, became more on the atheist spectrum, but people that came holding certain religious beliefs became more religious after being in college. And here I think it's very interesting because it shows that our colleges and universities are not only advocating for being secular, but also I think that this is due to the fact that many times people when in college simply have more tools of rationalizing their own beliefs and of proving what they think, so they become more and more convinced in what they already have because they now have better tools of rationalizing it to others. And because most people don't want to be in a state of cognitive dissonance, they don't want to feel like there is a contradiction between what they believe and the things that they are hearing. So even if they hear things that are contradictory, they would simply use that in order to take from it what they can to prove to themselves that they are right and not simply switch their whole belief system. So this is a very interesting thing, and I think this can be used in debates, and I think your opponents will not see that coming.
They could not believe their eyes because they were in college.
Yep. Okay. Another thing that is associated with becoming more religious, and this answers the question of when do people want to be more religious, is immigration. We see that many times when people are immigrants, they become more religious. Here in Israel, there is an interesting example. I had a professor that I used to work for that found that the immigration from the USSR in the 90s, while more than 60% of them, when making Aliyah, said that they are non-religious, I think it was more than 90% said that they are not religious. Now it is only 60% of them that say that they are not religious, meaning that there are 40% of people that when being immigrants in Israel decided to be more religious. And here I think that this has to do with the state of being vulnerable, meaning that if there are many uncertainties in your life, if there are many changes that are going on, many times religion is the thing that can offer the answer, a community to belong to, and so on. And here I think that even de Tocqueville referenced it. Tocqueville was a French philosopher that had a very famous book about America and the democracy in America. He visited it in the 18th century, and it's an incredible document. I would recommend that you read it. And he spoke about the religious revival in the United States, and he said that this is due to the fact that Americans lead such a hard life that is full of so many problems, and they have it so hard economically wise, and they're so lonely that when it comes to religion, they are no longer in a critical mode. When it comes to religion, they don't have the mental ability to try and be critical towards God, because they spent all of that when it comes to the economy and survival. So they simply kind of lose all of their guards when it comes to religion and succumb to that. Okay. And last thing, we have the current trends in the world regarding religion. So there was a very popular notion in the 20th century that assumed that everyone is going to be secular, that the world is going to turn to science, people will not be religious anymore, and we will see it as something of the past. But this didn't happen. On the contrary, we have two trends that you can say are contradicting. So on the one hand, we have more people becoming religious, and we have more people becoming extremely religious. And here I would like to say that this kind of fundamentalism is something that is happening because of the modern world. Meaning that because in today's world we have less and less order, because we have less rules to follow, because the communities are falling apart, because it's very hard to have a common identity in a nation that has many ethnicities and many people with different lifestyle. People seek religion as a means of bringing order back to the chaos that people see in their own lives. And it's very easy to be swayed by rhetoric that promises that now we will have a society that functions. Now we will have a set of rules that would actually reflect who you are. And I think that much of the rhetoric that people in Al-Qaeda or in Daesh use is against the West, and the fact that there is chaos in the West and there are no values anymore because everyone can do whatever they want. And there are many people who have a lot to gain from this new order, especially people that had privileges in the past. So usually we're talking about people that are older, that would now have more of a position. Usually we're talking about males that would have more privileges in a country that is based on Sharia laws, unlike liberal countries. Usually we're talking about people that do not find themselves in terms of they don't have a job, they don't have the right skills, they're not being looked at, and this new world of order can give them some sort of meaning and a new purpose to live by in a world that doesn't offer purposes that easily, because everyone can choose their own purpose and goals in life when we're talking about the West. So this is on the one hand. On the other hand, we have a generation, especially your generation, the millennials, in the West that are abandoning organized religion. Now, here it's important to notice that it's not necessarily that they are not religion. Some of them define themselves as unidentified, meaning that they might hold to a certain degree of spirituality, but they don't see themselves as a part of an establishment. They don't want to be a part of an institution that is a religion, but also people move to other forms of religion that are more liberal and are more communal. So you see many people that were Catholics that are now evangelical, because it focuses more on the individual. It gives people more of an ability to express themselves as religious creatures, but not necessarily having to conform that deeply to what other people do. So you can even see that in their rhetorics. Many times they would say, but my Bible says so. And they actually believe that it's their own Bible. It's not the Bible, it's my Bible. And it's a very interesting notion to see how those forms of religion capitalize on the fact that many young people are more individualistic, more young people don't want to be told what to do on every subject, and they use this in order to attract more believers to them. So this is something that we can also see as a trend happening in religion. And basically that's it. So if you have questions, you're welcome, and if not, then thank you.
You gave us a lot of information. So can you give a short sentence about each topic, how we can use it in a debate?
Okay.
For example, in the your approach to religion, how, from all what you described and explained, what we can take from it and use it in a debate. Can you give emotion, for example, that can be...
What you do, you know.
Okay. So let me think about emotion, but I can say that with my approach to religion, when you encounter emotion about doing something as a religion or to a religion, I would go to the analogy of, okay, let's look at it as an organization. Let's see, is there a problem in the status quo that makes them more susceptible to change their market strategy? Is there something that might prevent them from surviving as an organization? Let's look at the people that are part of that organization, and things like that. So I would use that as something to keep in the back of my mind when encountering different religious motions, and keep on challenging yourself with coming up with different argumentations due to that analogy. So I think that this is something that can be used. Okay, changes in the religion. So once again, there is the general rule of a change should come from within. So here I would look, if you have a motion of forcing religions to do certain things, see if there is internal support for that or not. If there is, this is something that can serve you in the debate. If there isn't, try to see if whether there are certain incentives that can be used or alternatives that can be used, and so on. But use this kind of general rule of thumb. Also, I would use the examples that were given in this section to say to the judge, you know, this is not something very new. We already did that in the past and it worked because. Do you want me to continue with the rest? With the 5, 6, 7? No? Okay, so Itai is signaling that not, but we'll do it later if you want. Okay.
Like there are emotions that are not religious, but they have some kind of impact on the religious population. So we can implement what you just told us in this kind of motion when we need to analyze the impact on the religious population.
Yeah, I think you can definitely do that, and I think that you should always have in mind that you cannot talk about religious people as a whole. You should always try and see whether there are groups within them, whether we are targeting the institution or just the people, and to remember that things can change and are more fluid than what might look.
Two things. First thing is about religion, good or bad. About the argument from the side that says the religion is bad. There is one argument that we should live according to our personal rationality. So I would like to ask if I can use in a rebuttal, if I can use a rebuttal of saying that we never use our personal rationality. We have a rational of the society that shows us the way.
So, the word maybe autonomy, not rationality, like the autonomy, your ability to make choices over yourself. Now, about what you said, I think that it is fair to say that we are never fully autonomous in what we do because our conduct is influenced by certain values that we have. So we are influenced by the education that our parents give us, we are influenced by our culture, we are influenced by rules and so on. But then notice that the question in the debate becomes, how much of an influence do you want a certain institution to have? So you might say, yes, I'm fine with people being influenced, but I don't want them being brainwashed. Or you can say, I want them to be influenced only by the government and not by the religious institution. So I accept the fact that there are many things that impact our decision making, but you should ask yourself whether you want this impact or not.
Okay. The second thing is that I saw that there are lots of surveys that show that people born with the ability to see things as a conservative person or as a liberal person, that people born like this.
So I'm not sure how much of that is in genes. I guess you could say that it makes sense that maybe certain people are more rigid, some people are more open to changes and generally to things that they see. But I don't think that you should look at it in a deterministic way, meaning that I think things can be changed. I think that even people that are less susceptible to changes can learn to become more open, and I think that even people that are more liberal, if they feel like they are under attack, maybe they would become more conservative. So I wouldn't use it as an argument in the debate saying, oh, there are people that are just conservatives and you cannot change them. I would look into how we change and whether it's effective enough to even impact the people that are born conservative. Maybe that's a fair thing to say. Anyone else? Okay, so thank you.
And what was we asked before about like if Muslims I forget the word.
There is no need to swear in courts today. The judge is just saying you have to tell the truth, in any language or something that they should understand, but there is no oath in courts today, for that matter,
And
especially in Israel.
I know that you don't have to. Question is, do you provide a religious alternative if people?
No, you just say that
You
if
just
you
ask
will
them?
lie, you will be fucked up by the law.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so once again, thank you, and thank you for being a good audience.